assault on Schweinfurt in October of 1943, and other raids that week in which 88 more American bombers had been shot down, helped persuade the Allies to cut back on daytime raids over Germany until they could design and produce enough fighters capable of escorting bombers all the way to their targets and back again. The targets themselves were changed as well. Bombers continued to bomb cities, including Berlin, and to battle war industries. But the destruction of the German Air Force on the ground as well as in the air now took top priority. The Allies were determined to dominate the skies before the planned invasion of France. Before D-Day.
Of course, being an enlisted man, we didn't think the officers knew what they were doing. We could have fought it a bit better than they did. But occasionally, the missions came off proper. We kind of realized that these guys knew what they were doing. They were fighting the right war. It was not a you lose 10 bombers, you lose 100 men.
Earl Burke was no longer flying. He had been wounded again, this time by shrapnel, from a bomb that exploded while he was on the ground.
They put me in a hospital. And there they told me that I had my arm removed. But fortunately, the chief of surgery came upon me in the hallway as I was going into the operating room. He says, "What was I doing in there?" He says, "Well, I guess I'm going to have a little problem with my arm." "Well, what's wrong with your arm?" So I got wounded, and I got what they called osteomyelitis. And that was the scourge of World War I. You ever got wounded in the bone, that's what happened. So no, we're not going to do it. Back in the ward. Put me back in the ward. Put me back in a cast. Cut a hole in the cast. The little wire net across it. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm making a little home for somebody." So what is that little home going to do? He says, "Well, to keep these little guys on your arm so they can eat all that stuff out of your bone." And I said, "Well, what kind of things are they?" He says, "They're little white things, you know, like this." And had a handful of maggots, put them in there and put the wire cage back on it. He says, "Now those little guys are going to eat that stuff out of you because we can't get it out of you. There's no way we can get that out of you." So there I was with this little thing over there and watching those guys having a meal. I was in a hospital 15 months.
Earl Burke's air war was over. He returned to California, helped rescue pilots lost at sea on training missions, and finally went home to his parents in Sacramento. Despite the all-out Allied raids, German aircraft production would actually increase. "We are virtually drowning in aircraft," wrote one German flyer. But the Luftwaffe was now losing trained crews far faster than they could be replaced. And Allied bombing had also denied the Germans the precious fuel they needed to train new ones. The time has come, the chief of the German fighter wing told his superiors, when our force is within sight of collapse. When the time finally came to invade France, the Allies would own the skies.
Laverne, Minnesota. For our Rock County boys. Dear gang, who'd have thought 4 years ago that you'd be reading this in all the states of the Union? Maybe in Africa, India, Iceland, England, Alaska, New Guinea, Australia, Caledonia, Hawaii, New Zealand, and a score of other places with funny names. Up until late Monday, it didn't look much like winter, and then the white flakes began to fall silently, swirling in white clouds, almost blotting out the streetlights at night. But it didn't last very long, just enough to throw a little mantle of white in patches over the dark, bare, dirty-looking ground. Tuesday morning, the snapping cold came. And by Wednesday morning, the smoke from the chimneys was hanging like white plumes in the clear, quiet, frosty air. Al McIntosh, Rock County Star-Herald.
Americans could now look back on some real progress in the war against the Axis. In the Pacific Theater of Operations, Americans had recaptured Attu in the Aleutian Islands and were fighting on Bougainville and New Guinea. But the Japanese were still on the march in Burma, intent on invading northeastern India. And the long campaign to take the Gilberts, the Marshalls, and the Carolines, to liberate the Philippines and eventually attack the Japanese home islands, had only just begun. In the European theater, improved radar, new long-range Allied aircraft, and ever-growing numbers of escort ships sailing from American shipyards reduced the threat from German U-boats. More and more weapons and equipment were now reaching the embattled Soviet Union. When the Red Army began to sweep the enemy from the Ukraine, thousands of newly manufactured American trucks helped make possible their deadly pursuit. The Axis had been driven from North Africa too, and Sicily was now in Allied hands. But the Germans were fighting back hard in Italy. And in secret, they had already begun to implement a policy of systematized murder that would one day persuade even the most cynical GI that the war had to be fought. As Allied leaders drew up plans for the long-delayed invasion of the continent, Hitler put tens of thousands of laborers to work, strengthening his coastal defenses. For the men of Laverne, Sacramento, Mobile, Waterbury, and every other American town, things were bound to get still tougher.
That's our show, folks. Thanks for watching.